So, hello everyone. It is a great pleasure to be here today to participate in the Belvedere conference, Linked Open Data and its Social Value panel. So today's presentation focuses on exploring the potential of Metaverse in liberating the narrations of the displaced objects and the content being displayed on these content being touched on in this presentation is partially based on the findings from my PhD project that uses the biographic approach to reclaim the story of a piece of mirror fragment in the digital space. Studying what this concept, metaverse, means for the museum practices, scholars suggest that metaverse is actually a virtual world within which people from different countries could meet in the real time and share their experiences together. This is a quote from Natalia Grincheva, who also gave a very inspiring talk yesterday. So it could be perceived as an ideal space for cross-cultural interactions and decentralized storytelling. With that characteristic, the source community of the displaced objects began to perceive Metaverse as an alternative virtual platform to regain voices in telling their own cultures and histories when they find themselves being underrepresented in the museum environment. So instead of penetrating deeper into the application of these multiple different technologies, this presentation would suggest the museum to carefully re-examine the object information they have in their database to re-evaluate whether the information they have can actually fully represent the voices from various agencies, especially the source community. And what are the object information that still needs to be included in the museum documentation through forging genuine collaboration with various cultural institutions and individuals? So by exploring the potential of this virtual space in integrating and unveiling a more authentic and complete story of the displaced objects, we can try to find out a way to liberate the museum's narration. In this way, the application of technologies could play a more socially meaningful role in reshaping our perceptions towards the displaced objects, as well as the cultures that they represent in the real world. So this presentation would cover the following aspects. First of all, I will briefly explain what does it mean by displaced objects and how are they normally displayed in the museum, drawing on studies done by previous scholars. By doing so, I will stress on the limitation of physical space in displaying the full story of this type of object. Next, I will analyze the potential of Metaverse, or to be more precisely, the linked open data in connecting agencies to reveal the polysemic nature of the displaced objects. I will also touch on its social implications in the final section, meaning that in addition to tracing the itinerary that the object had been through and collecting all those information that are related to the object, it is also worth considering how connecting these multiple information sources that are geographically apart would allow us to excavate the hidden stories that had resulted in the diasporic journey of the object. So first of all, I will clarify the term displaced object that is commonly used during the presentation. So the word displace describes the act of moving something out of its place. And to be more precisely, that move is involuntary, for the objects or people are forced to leave the place where they normally live. The term displaced object is commonly used by many scholars in museum studies like Dudley, Turner, and Genep, who use this term to highlight the movement of these objects after being dissociated from their places of origins. The major characteristics of this type of objects, from their findings, is that they have been singularized from the cultural wholeness they originated. And this physical decontextualization can lead to the detachment of the original meaning from the objects, for the objects now gains a new identity when being part of a new integrated whole in the exhibition space. These objects, as the ones that I show on this slide, that had traveled all the way from their places of origins to the host museum, have gone through a very complicated process of reassembling and reinterpretation, so that they can be a piece of what is called museum object. As Tuan suggested, the service of museum is to generate didactic illusions that tells how to interpret the past in a reality framed by the museum. Well, such practices could potentially distort the information that the creator of the object aims to deliver to the viewers or users. The major problem is that when museums use a new storyline they created to introduce the object, there is a risk that the traumatic history of the displacement and the process of transportations that the object had experienced would be overshadowed. And together with it, the history of international interactions between cultures and the problems that it could unveil are lost. As suggested by scholars like Matthews and Harlem, the object interpretations that viewers can learn from the museum are like monologues of the exhibition curator or the ethnographers, who distilled his or her knowledge about the object based on their lifelong investigations in a nutshell. While the name of the narrators are not even made visible for the viewers who see the objects in the museums, the information viewers imbibed during their museum experiences still come from the ideas of these, as what Gimblet called the absent lecturer, who impart new meanings onto the object while downplaying other possibilities of interpretations. So what can be learned from these limitations when we re-examine the potential of digital virtual space in unraveling the object story? Well, this means that upgrading the media through which information is conveyed from older to newer cannot really ensure the empowerment of democracy if the information still comes from only one single perspective. Especially when museums organize their digital or online exhibitions or catalogs in a way that is inherited from the traditional ways of recording, managing, and communicating the values and meanings of the objects. It is therefore crucial to extricate the museum's interpretation of the objects from the past implications. It could be the routines that the museum adopt in cataloging and interpreting the objects, or the technology that are used to adopt to support their work. And to replace that with new implications of humans and material agencies can really solve this problem. So this is where the metaverse could play its role with its capacity and connectivity in linking relevant data in a way that can challenge its existing narrations. So before coming to that point, I will just briefly touch on my case study that focuses on restoring the complete story of a piece of neurofragment. And I will just briefly introduce how I use the biographical approach to collect object information from diverse agencies, and then expand on what that means in utilizing the potential of linked open data when we move this approach to the digital sphere. So my research focuses on studying one mural fragment originated in Kizil Grottos, or the Kizil Cave Complex in Xinjiang Uighur Autonomous Region in China. While this site had experienced dramatic cultural and social changes, the major destruction on the heritage site took place between 1902 till 1914. A large amount of the artwork from the cave, including some pieces of mural paintings, were removed from the grottos and were forced to set out on their separate journeys. Some of them did not settle in one place, but had experienced constant transportations, especially between the two world wars as a result of hyperinflation in Germany and the unstable social context at that specific historical period. This is the photo I took in cave number 38 during my fieldwork in Kazil in 2020. As you can see that the mural paintings that are still left in the cave are no longer complete. And I think you can also find those traces left by the explorers when they took the fragments of the paintings. By taking a biographic approach, I use the object as a medium through which we can find different value systems and cultural preferences adopted by the source community, the explorers, and the host museum, and how those perspectives are formed within different social historical contexts. I found that by taking this approach, we really reveal a wealth of information about the object, as well as the historical and cultural context behind those social encounters, which can potentially enrich the object's data available on the museum's website in a more socially and culturally meaningful way. For example, taking this approach allows me to compare the different knowledge structures adopted by the museum and also the source community, and would also allow me to find why these changes occurred and how they're different. So having said these findings, we can now look at how this approach could be applied on the virtual third space. We can try to explore how to solve these limitations set by the confinement of the physical space and the pre-existed knowledge structure adopted by any of the organizations. As mentioned earlier, objects are not singular items. They gain their meanings when in clusters of relevant objects and events. Those clusters of objects could be found in networked institutions. For example, it could be the source community or the host museum. Or for some objects like mine, the one in my case study, that had been transported from one organization to the other, there would be more than one host museums as well. It could also be found in the network of collecting, like the explorers, collectors, and art dealers. But when building a network like this, we need to think carefully on how to balance the power among the agencies. Scholars like Srinivasan stress that the standardized mechanism supported by rigorous structures in generating a language to tell the object story can be completely different when comparing with how the source community perceive and talk about the objects from a different cultural perspectives, which is sometimes outside the scope of the structured framework adopted by the museum. Thus, in a pre-designed framework that determines what type of information need to be included in an object's metadata, and then what category should the information belong to, it is hard to say if it can ensure the restoration of the full story of an object based on the equal power relationships between the source community and the host museum during the collaboration process. Facing this issue, the participating organizations within the network, especially the source community, should have their autonomous control over what kind of information they want to or feel appropriated to share with other organizations in this network. So this is suggested by scholars like Hodgson and Porter. And instead of being imposed and asked and told to fill information in a pre-existed structured framework set by a different institution who may not even familiar with the culture of the source community. And it is very important to build a decentralized network like the one shown on this slide. By using the life history of the object to string up the fragmented story that occurred in different societies, it encourages the formation of a decentralized collaborative networks between source community members and the museum curators, so that making it possible for multiple ontologies to be embraced. Although the network model is suitable in compelling the discrete information of the displaced objects that are scattered in different organizations and the individuals, data that are brought together via this diagrammatic approach, constituted mainly by nodes and linking lines, is criticized by scholars like Gurkov as too simple to accommodate the detailed information that explains how and why those complex and plural connections are formed within different contexts. So considering this limitation, Jones suggests perceiving the object as being part of complex cultural ecosystem within which stories of how the interdependencies between objects and other relevant social components could be found. In this way, the links between nodes could also function as trials that delineate a more dynamic relationships between people, objects, and places within the various contextual landscapes. Similarly, creating an object biography in the digital space not only trace the itinerary of the objects, but also add plots to the storylines by cross-referencing detailed information one can find in archival documents such as letters, field notes, and museum file, which can help to explain how those different places, events, and objects are connected to the objects within different contexts. By doing so, how different epistemes influence the object's interpretation can be made more obvious and visible. For the people who work in the museum, it provides a valuable chance for them to think outside their knowledge structure, working as a starting point to democratize and refine their narrations. From those stories that tell how the object is connected to relevant social actors in different societies, we can find the relationship and interactions between cultural groups that are connected by the object and how that change through time. Instead of trying to pursue a perfection in digitally restoring the physical appearance of an object, taking an opposite approach that utilizes digital virtual space to connect organizations with an aim to find out what had caused the tour and warn that happened to the objects in history, or the nuances in the object's representational meaning would be more socially meaningful. As Donuts suggested, utilizing linked open data to creatively regenerate a more open, messier, and more organic world of the displaced object's life story could inspire deeper thinking on the object's journey. It could probe questions like what had caused the transportation of the objects from its place of origin to the museum and galleries, and how the same object could be interpreted differently. Questions like this and relevant investigations that follows are the crucial steps to be taken in enriching the story of the objects, leading to the possibilities of reclaiming a fuller image of the displaced objects constituted by traumatic memories of breakings, unpredictable causes of movings, and intentional reinterpretations. And by articulating the changing cultural identities of displaced objects as a connecting tissue between cultures, it tells a different and more inspiring story of object and cultural encounters, comparing with the one that we can normally find in museums. So this is the end of my presentation. So if you have any questions, please do feel free to ask, or you can just contact me via this email address. Thank you very much for listening.